welcome back to another episode of
Just a squirrel
looking
for a nut.
trying to
get
out of
this
rut.
Whoa!
That's horrible.
That's bringing the word rut to a whole new level. That's almost making the word rut into smut. What on earth just happened? Everybody, it is good to have you. I know that there's folks watching, and it is good to see everybody. It wouldn't be a Thursday without the Nut Crew here. Now, regular host Oleg and I are in the house. We've also got our co-hosts Chris Sykes and Brian Goldsack in the room, ready to set the house on fire. And we have special guest John Dillo in that room with us as well, and he's going to be talking, and we're going to just be torching up the internet tonight, y'all. It's going to be fun. Y'all are going to really need to be bringing some bravery into the house. I'm going to start with a story. Now, y'all know I like my myths. I'm going to talk to you about Medusa. Medusa was someone in Greek mythology. She was punished by the goddess Athena for a sacrilege. And the punishment was that her hair turned into snakes and her skin turned scaly. She became so ugly that anyone who looked at her would turn into stone. And in fact, the word gorgonize, because the type of monster that she was a gorgon, which relates to freezing or fossilizing something, comes from Medusa. She literally, and I think this word is important for us to consider as we move on with the show tonight, she petrified anyone who looked at her. Eventually, a hero by the name of Perseus was sent to basically kill her. And Perseus had a very clever idea. He realized that if he looked at his shield, which was a mirror, and practiced his attacks backwards by looking at the mirror, he could cut off Medusa's head without actually looking at her, and therefore without turning into stone. And that's exactly what he did. I want us to think about the symbolism of that story, because I would like to start the hour with a question about it. Perseus was not able to be petrified by Medusa because he looked at the mirror. Petrification represents fear. Medusa, it could at least be argued on a symbolic level, killed the people who came to see her through fright. Perseus was able to overcome his own petrification, his own fear, by looking in a mirror. Do you think that story has any relevance as to how we can build up courage? Or do you think that it's a lie? Do you think that courage is something some people just have, some people don't? Someone talk back to me.
Well, I always heard it said that you cannot be courageous unless you have fear. Otherwise, you have nothing to be courageous against. So I think that fear is something that we all face, whereas courageousness is the choice to stand up to your fears.
What is real about fear then? What is fear to begin with?
I think fear can be an illusion, because I think Will Smith said this. He said that fear is often an illusion, and whatever you fear isn't nowhere near as scary as you think it may seem. Right. So I think from a fear standpoint, you're afraid of what's going to happen to you, and then some people are naturally some people naturally are risk takers, even though they feel that pit in their stomach, they're just naturally risk takers. And other people need to conquer smaller fears in order to go up and face that big fear. But I think fear is often an illusion. Now, of course, there's some fear, there's some things that you're afraid of that could harm you, obviously, right? A poisonous snake, a bear, right? Obviously, that can hurt you. But some things like fear of starting a business and it failing, that can petrify you to the point to where you don't even get started because you're afraid that it's going to fail, right? And naturally, the majority of people don't even get started, and then years later they wish they just would have tried, and they would have, at least if they failed trying, it would have been okay, as opposed to just not even trying at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Before we go any further, I do want to welcome homegirl Melody. It is always so good to see you here. Talk back to
Melody.
us. We love hearing from you. What do y'all have to say to Chris?
Well, I think the idea of fear being an illusion makes a lot of sense. Some of the way I think about it as a counselor is a bit more rooted in some theory of emotion, that because most people can't really agree on some common definition for what an emotion actually is in terms of our biology and our psychology. But one way to think about it is emotion is a combination of our physiological response in the context we're in, and then our brain's interpretation of that. And so fear is really, it's an interpretation our brain gives of our physical reactions and the context. And so in some ways, we have some ability to reinterpret our fears, to shift them from fear to something different, something more constructive, or something more courageous. Because if we even think about the physiological state of fear, you have fight or flight, adrenaline, heart's pounding, it's really very similar to that of excitement. So what you're saying, Chris, that fear can be kind of an illusion or something that maybe is a false interpretation makes a lot of sense to me.
Do you ever feel like, and this could be a question for anyone, but do you ever feel like there is, I don't know if danger is the right way to frame this, but do you ever feel like there's danger in reframing some of these situations that one might be fearful of? And I'll give you a personal example. When I was first introduced into this concept, or to this concept of reframing all of the negative experiences into positive ones, once I understood that I could do that, that's all I started to focus on. The danger that I experienced within my journey of doing it is I was reframing everything instantly. I get in a car crash. Okay, what can I learn from this? I'm in an argument. Okay, what can I learn from it? So the danger within that is that I didn't create enough space to actually process the real emotion that I was experiencing. Anxiety, stress, all these things that I believe are real at the end of the day. And so I wonder, from maybe your background, John, like, is that a danger that one could face in solely operating from a reframe positive mindset? Because then in the recent years, I've also started to question, is there value in negativity? Is there value in negative emotions? Is there value in being able to sit there and say, okay, this sucked. And yes, I might be able to learn from it moving forward. But at the same time, this is what happened and this is how I'm actually feeling.
Is there value in being old, bitter, and nasty?
I mean, but it's a legit question, like
Oleg, I mean, I'll jump in first. Fear it's an evolutionary adaptation. We have fear for a reason. And so constantly reframing it as opposed to allowing ourselves to work with it in adaptive ways can be a problem. And some of how I think about it is, when I'm working with clients, is we're not looking to shift everything to the positive side of the spectrum. We're learning to actually live with the full spectrum of human experience. And that involves positive joy, excitement, but also fear and sorrow and loss, because we learn from both sides of that spectrum. You and I being able to sit with fear as opposed to just try to either reframe it too quickly or move it from fear to excitement, which is something you can do. We miss out on some of the human connection we can have with other people. So I think, a balance between those two extremes is pretty important in my mind.
that word balance is something I want to touch on. I think that having a realistic view of the situation and applying reason to the situation is important. I've made this reference before. The word reason is like a derivative of the word ratio, and ratio is comparing one thing to another, right? So when you're reasoning through something, usually you're comparing the thing that you're perceiving right now to the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
Right. So if there's a tiger in front of you and you're like, you know what, maybe I could see some positive in this. Maybe this is an opportunity for me to learn about animals.
Yeah.
It's not reasonable. Like you're being completely unreasonable in that scenario.
Yeah.
And you're like twisting the reality of the situation in a way that's not going to benefit you. And perhaps there was a more realistic way that you could have responded that was in line with the reality of the situation.
Man,
I was thinking about the first 5 minutes of the movie Jaws, right? The swimmer. When the shark comes and bites off her leg before she hits the buoy, right? It would have been a bit ridiculous if she'd been like, oh, let me see if I could frame my imminent death by being swallowed by a man-eating fish
He's
in a
learning
way
about
that's
sharks.
positive.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
but
No,
you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
yeah. No, you're right. But Oleg, what you said something was, I started really thinking about what you're saying is like, from a negative standpoint, is there a benefit to being negative? And I think there is, if you have the tools to get back to being positive. I think that, for example, yeah, we talked about this today, right? Having the necessary, because Brian and I talked about this today. You can't get to a point of wherever you're trying to get to without experience, and then with experience, you have to go through. You have to learn these lessons to get to wherever you're trying to go. But just speaking specifically to the negative part, allowing yourself to be human is perfectly okay. For example, loss. If you lose somebody that's very, very close to you, spouse, parent, friend, it's okay to shout and be negative and say that this sucks. I feel terrible. As opposed to saying what you all have been saying this entire time, like, oh, well, they lived a beautiful life. And Brian kind of helped me flip what rational is. That's not rational, right? To lose somebody that close to you and then be very positive about it, and without showing the proper amount of grief. I think it's okay if you say, oh, listen, I'm going to allow myself a week or two to kind of grieve, or whatever, however long it takes you to grieve and go through and be negative and be like mad that this person that you were very, very close to is gone, but then work your way back to being positive, because Mike Tyson said this beautifully. He said that life is beautiful, but you have to accept the good and bad as being beautiful.
Well,
I think that's a perfect answer to your question, Scott. Literally, you asked us in regard to what we thought about looking in the mirror and understanding one's emotions. I couldn't think of a better response.
So I'm hearing, though, that you all are saying that since courage is presumably a response to fear, and we have, without being completely unreasonable, as Brian correctly pointed out, we have the ability to control how we respond to things, and it's not unreasonable for us to sort of dwell on the negative for a while. Do you all think that courage is actually a virtue? Because I don't know, hearing all of this, whether I think courage is a virtue. I am a natural risk taker. I'm an entrepreneur. More the fool me, I think, sometimes. And that's because I'm excited by the risk. I'm excited by the risk of being out here and starting this podcast and saying all sorts of stuff. And this may be me on a plane that goes right into the ground. So, some people might say, oh, Scott, you're so courageous. I could never, especially these people I knew that work for the government for 20 years. Okay, y'all. Oh, you're courageous by doing all this. You're out there, you're taking it out. But it's natural for me. I feel like this courage isn't anything special. So is courage an innate quality, or am I just not experiencing myself as being courageous because it's something I have innately due to my love of risk? And that's that. It can't be trained. By the way, can you be courageous without risk?
No, probably not. I think,
Why?
Scott, I mean, what are you courageous towards then. You can't just be like sitting down on a very comfortable couch doing nothing that is not risky at all, sipping on like a latte, and then somebody says, wow, you are so courageous right now. Like there has to be some element of risk involved that you have to face. But a point that you brought up was making me think. I think courageous also has a certain degree of consideration to it, like careful consideration. Like the definition of rash, being a rash person, I'm looking it up now, I don't have this memorized, is displaying displaying or
Walking
proceeding.
dictionary.
Imagine if I was just that smart. So displaying or proceeding from a lack of careful consideration of the possible consequences of an action. So I think it's possible to be rash, which is not what you want. I think courageous is good because it would imply that you had sound reasoning and still felt that it was appropriate to take that action.
Melody says that courage requires a risk of the unknown, as does rashness, though. How do we know where to draw the line between what's rash and what's actually courageous?
I don't think we do. I don't think we do because I think all of us operate from such different playing field. For example, and not to generalize, because there are plenty of people within professions who think like entrepreneurs but are not entrepreneurs, and the same thing is true vice versa.
Yeah.
But I think what I've learned from my experience is that for me, that's been one of the most difficult parts, is understanding what is that fine line. Brian, you just mentioned, I wrote this down here, possible consequences. I think that's one of the hardest things that I've tried to predict. And I don't know what my percentage is, but it seems like I'm maybe over 50% on the correct side, but I couldn't tell you, to be honest. And I think that's I think it's a double-edged sword. I think it's a blessing and a curse, being able to live life that way and know that, okay, I'm taking this risk of being on the show with 5 people, right? I might have known Scott for 2 years. I've known Chris and Brian for X number of, days or month, and John X number of minutes.
Yeah, 10, 15 minutes.
Honest.
Yeah.
But even in that case, I'm still choosing to be courageous in taking this risk. I'm choosing to be courageous with my reputation. I'm choosing to be courageous with what I've built to this point, and ultimately taking this leap of faith, because each and every single one of you could say things that could not only harm your own reputation, but it could also harm my reputation without having been a participant in that particular dialogue or sequence, just solely because I chose to assign a name to a particular day or time. So I think, going back to your point, Scott, I don't, in my personal opinion, I don't think I do. I think if anything I do know at the end of the day is when I do take action, or when I do try to exercise courage, going back to your earlier point, is everyone born with it or not? I don't know. What I've learned from my experience is that I believe I developed it more through practice. I think the more confident I became in actually taking one step forward, the more courage I developed over time.
I think courage. I think having these conversations with Brian in terms of like our podcast, we've come to realize, even through talking through points, that nothing is black and white. So courage isn't black and white, right? So for you, Scott, you don't mind taking risks. Being courageous for you is not maybe starting a business or jumping off of a building. It may be for you, getting in a boat in some crazy water. Like that may be courageous for you. But if you're talking to somebody who's not an entrepreneur, and you're like, man, I'm scared it may fail, you're like, just do it. Like you don't, to you that's not courageous. So courageous has different forms for different people. You have people who are afraid of going into a networking event and just having a conversation with a complete stranger. And even with us, I don't know everyone, but like with people, like just for example, if that doesn't bother us going into a room and talking to somebody, and then somebody comes up and you walk up to that person and you're like, is everything okay with it? I'm just so scared talking to somebody. We may look at it like, what? But for them, if they had a conversation with one stranger, that's very courageous for them. Right. So I think that yes, you have to. I think that one, courageous look different for different people, but then two, I think that when you're being courageous for yourself, I think that you have to look at what is the ultimate outcome for you. Is it a feel good moment that, wow, I was scared of skydiving, but now I skydive, now I feel better, or is it courageous to the point to where this thing could snowball into to some type of success?
Careful consideration goes back to careful consideration. I mean, like, not all risks are good risks. Like, if I was like, hey, I'm a courageous person, somebody just gave me some crystal meth to try right now, and I'm going to be brave and I'm going to do it. It's a risk.
That would be quite the episode.
That would be an amazing,
We'll do it live.
Yeah, we'll do it live. It's a risk.
It would be an experience I would never forget.
I'm telling you.
Then you'd be associated with a pretty bad dude, like you were saying, all that. But it's a risk. But if you carefully consider the outcomes surrounding that risk, was that a risk worth taking? Just the simple fact that it's a risk doesn't mean that it's a good thing. Not all risks are good things. If you go back to Perseus, he used careful consideration. He could have been reckless. He could have said, I heard about this creature, Medusa. I bet I could kick her butt, run right into that cave that she lived in. Didn't think at all about how to potentially battle her, and been one of the other dudes that just gets frozen. But he carefully thought through how he was going to handle it, trained, and then executed that strategy through careful consideration, which is the difference between rashness and courageousness.
You're sort of going, by the way, Brian, as to what Melody said, which is, I think everyone has it in them to be courageous, is what she was referencing, but they have to take action in order to bring it out. And I think that perhaps the thing that she didn't say that you're talking about, and she may have thought that in her mind, or it just maybe not come up when she put that comment in there, which is rational thinking around bringing out, or intentional thinking as to bringing it out. Now, panic. If you do something, let's talk about not panicking in terms of running from something, but let's say you react in panic to a dangerous situation in front of you. Can there be overlap between panic and courage? Or is something that may appear courage but done in panic really not courageous, just looking courageous to someone watching it on the outside?
Interesting question.
Oh,
Yeah, it seems like if it's done in panic, it's driven by fear, as opposed to you making a deliberate or rational decision where you're overcoming fear with courage. So panic is more this, at least in my thinking, this reflexive response to some threat situation that we don't really even consider or rationally weigh out. It's even a bit rash, because it's just a spontaneous panicked response. So yeah, I don't know if I would say panic and fear are similar. I think, or panic and courage are similar. I think they're pretty distinct. But one of the things that you were saying, Chris, that stood out to me is the relativeness, that what is courageous for that person who's maybe got massive social anxiety, for them to talk to one person is massively courageous. But for Scott to go walk through a networking meeting and talk to every single person there probably isn't a big deal. And so courage is on some sort of a relative scale, 100%. Given who we are subjectively. But I'm going to jump right back to Scott's question from a while ago. The idea of courage as a virtue, I don't know if it is I don't know if we can consider it a universal virtue, because it gets into our personal values. If what you value most in life is safety, is the avoidance of suffering, is mitigation of risk, then courage isn't something you're really going to value. It's more, I'm going to value avoidance and risk mitigation, where courage goes in the opposite direction.
Before we go any further, I just do want to say hello to Gloria Sanchez, reaching out from Luxembourg. It's got to be so late there. Gloria, thank you so much for joining us. It always just brings me delight to have you in town. Okay, I'm done with that. But Gloria, please be sure to comment and give us some stuff, give us some feedback here, because we love having you as part of the dialogue.
You know, one thing I wondered, based on what you just shared, John, is there such thing as false courage? Because I've experienced false confidence, right? Stepping onto the stage, believing that I have what it takes to deliver X, Y, and Z, believing that I'm worth a particular value, and then through experience, realizing that maybe I needed a few more around the world, the city, whatever, trips to gain some of the experience. And I'm wondering, does the same thing apply to courage? Is there such thing as false courage? And the other question I had, maybe for you, and I don't know if anyone else can answer this, feel free to chime in, but just based on your profession, how well do you think an average person actually understands his or her emotions to begin with?
Very little.
Yeah,
very little.
You say that as a financial advisor. I'm actually suspect you have quite a bit of
no, very little.
No, a lot of calls recently.
No, very little, because I think that the hardest thing in the world to do is knowing thyself. Period. It's very easy to get to know somebody. It's easy for me to get to Scott, ask a few questions. You know, we have a couple of coffees, and then eventually I feel like over the time is knowing who Scott is. The reason why it's so hard though to really, really know yourself and know your emotion is because as human nature doesn't want to see the bad in us, like in me. If I look in the mirror, I can't admit that I have some bad parts about me, so I'd rather not deal with that. I think and then to your point, Oleg, from an emotional standpoint, if somebody points that out to me, my reaction to that. Normally, the truthful reaction, or when you know somebody telling you the truth, is how you react to the truth, especially if you don't want to hear it, right? Chris, you're extremely selfish. I'm not, and you just kind of just go crazy, right? It's like, well, like, why are you? Because imagine if they said something that's not true. Think about how calm you are when you know for a fact that it's not true.
Yeah.
Right. Brian hates babies, and Brian's like, what? That's crazy. Like he probably would just like what is like what? Why would you say that? But if it's something that can hit a nerve,
why would you say that?
I love babies, by the way. But exactly. You know that I love babies.
no, but you see what I'm saying? Like Brian, he has 2 beautiful twin boys, but but if you think about how people react to something that's innately not true about themselves, how calm they are, right? But if it's true, like imagine you, if you can think about a situation where you were in an argument with somebody and somebody pointed something out about you that you really want to hear, and how it almost elevated the heat in that conversation, right?
That was like that comedian John Mulaney said he hates hanging out with middle schoolers because they make fun of you accurately.
Yeah.
They find the thing in you that you're super insecure about and point it right out. Yeah, you're right. Great.
Well, Chris, I love your point about, if someone points at that kind of ugly, dark thing in you, that's where we get defensive. Like if I said you're a 10-foot tall woman, you'd be like, what the hell are you talking about, John?
Exactly.
It just wouldn't make sense. But if I said you're selfish, you'd be like, either this guy's nuts or he's just being silly. But tell me what allows you, help us understand, to face the darkness in you. Because I think that is a barrier to us knowing ourselves. We don't want to look inside because we know there's selfishness and pettiness and anger. And so for you, how do you look at the dark side so that you can know yourself?
I just have to jump in here just quickly, though. We're getting a lot of feedback, and the folks are engaged. Gloria, for instance, says vulnerability is your strength, and that goes as to facing these things that we may or may not feel true about ourselves. Shauna says, preach. Hey!
Oh, that's Shauna. No, listen, Shauna is amazing. She supports the podcast. I love it. You have to check out her podcast as well. She's amazing. You have got to check her out for sure.
Shauna, thank you for joining us, and thank you for giving us that heads up. Shauna, hopefully you'll come back again and again. And then let me also give a quick shout out to Margot. That happened to you yesterday. Margot, if you could just maybe explain which one. Surely it wasn't someone I don't know. But just sometimes there's a little bit of a lag that is between when people type in the remarks and when it actually shows up in the comments. So we want to be able to respond to folks and get them engaged in the conversation. So if you could just let us know what happened to you yesterday. And Shauna, yes, we love shouting out folks here because if you're part of the audience, you're part of the family. We get our claws in you. We never let go. I'm so glad to have another podcast in the audience here. Now, I just rudely interrupted some folks. Was it John? Was it who was talking before I just?
I'm putting Chris on the hot seat and asking him, how do you look at those ugly parts of you? How do you look inside and be able to face the darkness?
It's my personal opinion. I think that you have to accept yourself fully, understanding that because you got to think about this, right? We live in a world now that perfect is normal. So if we look at ourselves that we aren't the perfect being or don't have the right response to every situation that comes up, we feel that something is wrong with us. But innately as human beings, you're going to be troubled. You know, you're going to have these ways about you, like you said, pettiness, selfishness, or you may just be, you know, arrogant, whatever the case may be. Everybody has a thing, right? I think full acceptance of yourself is how you but how to fully accept yourself, what helped me out was therapy, right? Because it's one of those things where you can talk through things and then you realize that it's okay to be this person and be 100% you, but it's also up to you to try to be the best version of yourself, knowing that along the way that you're going to mess up. I even like with me, I was telling Brian this 2 days ago, I have like a morning routine. And I feel so bad sometimes that like if I didn't read my 10 pages today or I didn't read my affirmations today, I'm thinking about because you know, you hear all the time where you can't take no days off and you got to do this 7 days a week and blah, 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 blah. And then you realize that, gosh, I had to be a machine to try to be a top person. And then when you miss a day, or miss a couple of days because of work or because of just life, and you're just like, you feel so like it emotionally, like you feel bad, like you feel so bad that gosh, I didn't read today, so now I'm not getting smarter today. Like it's crazy when you think about that. But we live in an age and time that if you're not perfect, then something is wrong with you.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think you're bringing up something so important, this idea of accepting the good and the bad of us, those brilliant parts of us and those dark and broken and in some ways not terribly acceptable parts of us. And if we can develop, I like to think of it as having multiple relationships with ourselves where we can put an arm around those parts of us that are maybe more needy or more broken and actually be able to care for them. Then we in a sense, we pull them into the family and they can be a part of the conversation as opposed to that ugly thing we need to hide away in a closet.
What if that ugly thing is the core of who you are, though? Like, what if you're a psychopath or like a malignant narcissist? Is that something you should lean into? I love myself. I'm a selfish monster that exploits people and does whatever I want to and don't care. I love that about me. Mwah.
See, but this is where I say like things aren't black and white.
Yeah.
Things are gray, right? Things are gray. And also, too, that person, do they really accept themselves? Because those same people are the best at masking those qualities.
Well, I think some of the narcissists I know, and narcissism, we throw this around very commonly right now. Actual narcissists are pretty rare, but the ones I've run into, they accept themselves unlike anyone else you will ever meet, and it's scary. And so, yes, there is. I think there is a lot of gray, but there's an objective line somewhere. I mean, I think we'd agree that, you know, there are some objective evils where we'd say the narcissist or the psychopath, we would want to steer them away from that sort of bold acceptance of the wickedness in them. And I think acceptance doesn't mean permission. I can accept a dark part of me and I can try to understand the brokenness and the hurt beneath it and try to move it to something different. I deal with a lot of people who struggle with addictions and they come in and like, my alcoholism is out of control. I can't believe what a piece of crap I am for drinking again. And I say to them, well, maybe you're drinking for a reason. Maybe there's something you really want. Let's figure out what that is. And then the darkness actually finds some resolution, because the darkness is often seeking something. Even you mentioned, and I'll shut up here in a second, but Chris, you mentioned selfishness. If a person struggles with selfishness, there's a reason for that. It's not just that they're an asshole.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
probably there was some unmet need in their life that if we can draw that to the surface, then that darkness makes sense and that darkness can resolve.
100%. I agree with you wholeheartedly, John.
I just wanted to point something out real quick that John and Chris both of you pointed out. So I read this book when I was hiking the Camino from Lisbon all the way up to Spain, called Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. And there's one part in there, and I was actually looking it up as both of you were speaking, where he talks about this concept of using relationships to better understand yourself, but not necessarily relationships that you have with other people, like friends, family, colleagues, mentors, whatever it might be, but more so relationships that you have to a particular situation. So a relationship that you have when you are stressful, like, who am I? Why am I showing up this way? What really caused it? What triggered it? And I remember reading it and literally hitting rewind, because I've never heard it that way. And this is the second time that the two of you pointed that out, like using relationships to better understand, how do I show up when I stand in front of the mirror? Why do I feel X, Y, and Z way? And I'm also curious, the other part of my realization or a question, maybe once again to anyone, what I've learned through my life to this point is that I think there have been so many years when I was striving for this ultimate version of acceptance in this world, accepting myself to be accepted amongst others. And what I've learned through my experience is, in my opinion, once again, I don't believe that concept exists in the same way that I wanted it to exist. I wanted it to exist that when I walk into a restaurant, I'll give you a perfect example. Right now, because I've been traveling, I have 2 t-shirts, I have 2 pairs of shorts, I have 1 pair of sweatpants, and I have a hoodie. So in most climates it works. Some climates it doesn't work at all. You walk in, I'll walk into, like the other day I had to go to a doctor's office. I walk into a huge building, everyone's wearing a suit. So clearly, right? Oddball out, like everyone sees. So I started to realize in that moment, like, this is an opportunity for me to practice what does it mean to be accepted in an environment where I may not feel like I'm being accepted. And so I wonder, to a degree, does that concept even exist? And what does that even mean to be fully accepted of who you are? Or is that an illusion? Is that an illusion that many of us make ourselves believe that it's possible, when the reality it may never be?
Gloria says something here that may be a potential way to begin thinking about a response to that question, as does Melody.
I think that
Great point, Melody.
I think, Oleg, to your point, acceptance, you have to realize what that means to you. But then first, I believe that everybody isn't deserving of the real you either. Right. So for example, you don't have to really change yourself, but you can be yourself to an extent to certain people. Right. Everybody does, like, because again, this is just my opinion. I think that, like, if you're with your spouse, if you're with friends, you can be the full John, you can be the full Scott, you can be the full Oleg, full Brian. They're your friends, spouse, whatever, or family, whatever. But if you're at work, right, if you can't really be 100% you sometimes because of the environment you're in. And also, too, you have to understand your relationship with acceptance. I'm gonna give you a personal example, right? When I was in high school, we couldn't afford designer clothing or brand name clothing, right? I was the exact same Chris. I like to joke, I like to have fun, like laugh, but people would talk about my clothing, right? Because I couldn't afford, like, the Jordans or the LR, whatever the name brand stuff was back then. My junior year, my dad allowed me to go shopping by myself, and I picked out what everybody was wearing in, like, at the time. I didn't change who Chris Sykes was. Not one person. I mean, not at all. In terms of like how like my personality. Once my clothes changed, all of a sudden I'm in circles that a year ago didn't want me in the circle because of my dress, and now this year they want me in the circle, and now everything I say is now funny, right? So it's like you have to understand what your relationship, Oleg, back to your relationship point. What is your relationship with acceptance, and what makes you want to be accepted? Because that could be a friend thing where you want to be accepted at school. That could be a parent thing where you've been neglected by parents, and then you go to a place to try to be accepted by certain people, right? I think understanding the relationship with acceptance is very, very key, and why you want it. But then too, from being you, you have to understand how to reveal certain points of you to certain people who deserve the full Brian, and then hold back some things from people so you're not really exposed to that, so then they don't really know you, and they could use that to their advantage to your detriment, if I'm saying that right.
I would like to say that I don't know if this idea of acceptance is entirely good, in the sense that if there are elements of your personality that need to get worked on, do you really want to love those elements of your personality? I mean, we all have shortcomings, and if we adopt this attitude where it's like, yes, I'm mostly nice, but yes, I am a little bit narcissistic and selfish, but I love that aspect of me too. Are we really doing society a favor if we adopt an attitude where we're not trying to refine out some of our shortcomings? And isn't it beneficial in a way to perhaps ostracize those shortcomings and not accept those shortcomings so we can continue to work on those things and become better people?
That is actually interesting. I'm sorry. Were you finished, Brian?
Yes, that was it.
Oh, I mean, that's a really interesting and such, as I'm sure you know, a very, very loaded topic. It goes as to a couple of things. First of all, it goes as to some of the questions that I have always had about certain practitioners within the self-help space, which are exactly love yourself, girl, or you know, homie, you know, lean into who and what you are, no matter what, and feel pride and whatever. These flaws are actually gifts to the world, because sometimes they are not, I think. And then the other thing is, as we as a culture become, especially in the pandemic, but it was moving in this direction very aggressively previously, as we became more and more multicultural and the world became flatter and flatter, as a certain author said, and getting smaller and smaller and more interconnected. There can be a place where we choose to withhold judgment of others, because they may not have some cultural values that we share, or they may come from a different background, or they may have a different aesthetic and all of that sort of stuff. Now, on the one hand, we don't always need to go around, and Oleg and I have talked about this a lot. We don't need to always go around expressing our judgment about everyone else. And I, for one, I believe Oleg would probably agree with me about this, because we've discussed it. Sometimes the world just does not need to hear my opinion about you. Sometimes no one needs to hear my opinion about you. There is virtue in just shutting the hell up sometimes. But then there are other times where the psychological processes that come with non-judgmentalism can become so embedded that we end up being in a situation where social sanctions of things that need to be sanctioned don't occur, and then they become normalized within society. And the self-help movement, I think, interconnects with that, in that it can push, not always, and there are different levels of credibility and intellectual gravitas that people bring into the room within the self-help space. Brian, I suspect you'll have some things to say about that, but you might not. And you know, then how do we sort of navigate those waters, and how do we figure out what we can accept and what we can't, and where do we draw the line between what we accept in others and don't accept within ourselves, that doesn't necessarily be tantamount to endorsement? Because I'll tell you, when I was in large organizations, for instance, I'd make all sorts of proposals, particularly my divisions. This is what we're going to do. Do you agree? People would be quiet. I would tell them, silence equals assent. If you're quiet, you've given me a yes. Well, people
100%.
learn how to say yes pretty quick, I'll tell you that. Or they learn how to disagree too.
Yeah.
So what do y'all think hearing that little package of goodies?
Well, I want to jump in on, and I'm going to argue with Brian here a little bit. And this might come down to semantics because we're talking about stuff that gets real complicated. And I'm going to try to get into your point as well, Scott. I don't think acceptance necessarily means permission to remain. Acceptance is an acknowledgement that there is this weakness in me. And when I see it come to the surface, I don't need to squash it. I don't need to deny it. I don't need to run from it. I can allow it to be what it is as I move it through a process of change. What I see when people, and you may not have met this, Brian, but when people can't be okay with the ugly parts of them, then every time those ugly parts are exposed, similar to what you were saying, Chris, they get defensive. And frankly, they waste energy defending themselves instead of just being able to say, oh yeah, I accept I can be a real asshole sometimes. Can you help me overcome that? And so then when you see that tendency rise up in you, you're no longer threatened by its existence. You're not having to fight it. You can say, oh, there it is again. Let me work with this to try to move in a different direction. Because I agree with you. Acceptance should not mean we allow the weakness to remain. Acceptance means, oh, the weakness is, and I don't have to run from it.
Absolutely. It makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. You can't, I guess people have to be aware that acceptance does not mean, hey, this is the way I am. I accept it. And I'm just going to stay like this.
I think that's crazy. I mean, if people want that, they're dooming themselves to mediocrity and brokenness.
Well, Melody had something to say about that, John. I just flashed that up there.
Oh, thanks, Melody. Appreciate it.
Well, one thing that I've been curious about when it comes to like this show, and I'm sure plenty of other opportunities like that each one of us is involved in, is sharing one's opinion without, let's say, necessarily having had lived experience, or sharing opinions about like arbitrary things. So one of the things that I was fascinated by, and I don't really have the expertise to go down this rabbit hole, but I'm just going to use it as an example, is the whole concept of a like flat earth theory, right? When there are so many people, it's true.
You just traveled halfway around the world and you don't have expertise to figure out whether that's true or not.
So I'm hearing Oleg is a flat.
No.
Okay, everyone, let's just stop there. Oleg is a flat earther.
Wrap it up, guys.
Yep. And COVID is fake. Thank you.
The point that I'm trying to make with that is the courage that it actually takes to be able to say things like that and actually have the belief. Now, I'm not saying, never mind, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. What I am saying is,
I was waiting for it.
In other experiences, I had an experience somewhat similar to that, where I felt that I had lived through an experience and I was actually developing the courage to express what I said. And I expressed it to Scott right when I was in Ghana, or right as I was leaving, and I sent it to Chris. Yeah. And I shared it with both of you and the other two and everyone else that's in the room that's probably asking like, what did you share? So I shared my whole experience of this question that I was asked quite often when I was in Africa compared to when I was in Europe, and that's the question of, are you safe? In Europe, many of my friends, people close to me, they didn't ask me that question that often. When I went to Ghana, that question was asked probably on a daily basis, and it was at the top of the ladder. It was almost before how are you, it was, are you safe? And it really got me curious. As far as this whole concept of how do you find courage to even share a perspective like that. So actually tomorrow, just, in the natural scheme of things, I decided that's when I'm going to share it. So my whole journey of being able to get to this point is I didn't have the courage to share that perspective at the beginning. And the perspective was that I did not have the best perception of people of color, plain and simple. I was born and I was raised in an environment where a lot of the films that I saw illustrated those of color as criminals and drug dealers.
For
I
sure.
couldn't name you a single film from my childhood where a person of color was a quote unquote good character, a hero. And because of that, what I've noticed myself doing in my teenage years was whenever I would walk on the sidewalk and someone else who was of color was on the same side, I'd cross the street.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until I was in Ghana where, this whole feeling of minority among the majority really hit me. I was the only white person within many, many miles. I started to realize a lot of these shortcomings, what Brian mentioned. And I mean, to this point, it's taken me days, if not weeks, to build up that courage. And I think a lot of that has to do with fear of rejection. Fear of rejected, whether it was not necessarily people of my color or anything, but more so people who are closest to me, in complete honesty,
Could you? I want to make sure I'm following you.
Mm.
Develop the courage to be honest about that. Is that
develop the courage to share my perspective based on that lived experience.
Got it. Yeah.
You know, Oleg, I think that's probably one of the reasons why you're turning into one of my favorite people of the world, because acknowledging that seriously, because it's like acknowledging something like that, having the courage to do so, especially now where you can't even, in this day and age where you can't even announce a shortcoming that you had, and then you acknowledge it, and then you have a different perspective because of experience. It's like
especially
now,
not about another race.
100%, 100%. Because also too, when people, like, if I have conversations with like family or like friends, and we get into like arguments, I've now trained myself to, okay, don't tell me what you think, tell me what you actually know. And you would see how different the conversation changes, because then they start to realize they're speaking in pure speculation about a particular topic.
Yeah.
The majority, sometimes when people are arguing, they're arguing from a point of speculation, not fact.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why, like, if my friend were having like some dumb argument, I'm like, I don't even say anything. Like, tell me exactly, like, for a fact, this is what's X, Y, and Z. Well, no, I really can't. Well, what I'm saying, you can't do it. So what are we having this conversation for if you don't really know, really?
Alexandria says hello, and Alexandria, thank you for joining us, and we would love to hear your comments as the evening continues. Gloria, thanks. I believe this was Chris for his authenticity, although that might have been Oleg. But in any event, everyone is being authentic tonight, and so I certainly share that appreciation. Margot, Oleg, when you were talking, and I put that up immediately, but she says, wow, that is honesty at its best, and that is courage to me to talk about race from that point, from anyone. But I won't say any more than that, except we all know that that's true.
No, Scott, but to Oleg's point, he identified the reason why he thought the way he thought. He's what controlled his mind in terms of perception of people of color, media images.
Yes.
And then he was amongst, he was in Africa, in Ghana, where he was the minority, and was like, well, wait a minute. Or even probably before that, it's like, this is not even, they're not even remotely what I thought, these people were. Right. Yeah. Because of your experience with them, and you realize, wait a minute, how did this image get in my head in the first place? And then you take it back to, it was media perception of a certain class of people. Right.
Well, and so I'm sorry, go ahead, finish, please. I just wanted to make sure we said goodbye to Melody. Powerful. She
Melody
said. And Melody, thank you for being here week after week. And then Margot says, I celebrate what I hear from this panel. And Margot, we celebrate you for joining us and for sharing your own perspective here. Thank you so much for that. We hope you're back again and again and again, because you're part of the family now. All right, Chris, you were saying something, then I just jumped in.
No, that was it. I said that it was powerful, because what I like about what Oleg did was he realized where the root cause. He went back to the root cause. Yeah. He didn't just say like, oh, I was in Ghana and I was experiencing. He's like, no, wait, that's one thing. But then where did the thought come from? Then he said media images and movies.
Well, and I want to just say something about that, because one thing that, just to go down a little bit of a rabbit hole related to that, it drives me personally nuts. And I don't know what y'all think about this, but this statement, everybody knows that Everybody knows that, right?
Yeah.
People who wear leather suspenders are slugs. Everybody knows that.
Of course. Yeah.
Everyone knows.
How could you not?
Yeah.
Everyone
It's
knows that
truism.
he's an idiot
That's just
and
the
his
way it
hair
is,
is gray.
yeah.
I had someone tell me everyone knows I dye my hair. Everyone knows
the beard
I don't
gives it
dye my
away.
hair.
Yeah, I can't keep my hair straight either. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But one thing
John,
I did,
you feel my pain, John.
I feel you there, Craig. Yeah.
the one thing I did want to say, as it relates to what Oleg was discussing, it ties into John's points surrounding like the appropriate type of acceptance that we need to have about ourselves. Because if Oleg went into that environment saying, I have no racist tendencies whatsoever, and he was closed off to the possibility that he might have been raised in an environment where the media had influenced him to think a certain way about people of a race, and he never accepted that that might be an option, he might have never healed in the way that he healed, because he would be in this perpetual state of denying that he might have had some tendencies.
Yeah.
But
I think what you're saying.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
All right. I work as a counselor, so people come to me and they're struggling with some mental health issue. And I would say one of the primary things I have to do with people is help them develop courage, because facing what we're talking about, Oleg is facing, I might have been brought up with some racist tendencies from the media and from the culture I grew up in. Being able to face that we're talking about courage here. It requires a courage, because facing our darkness feels threatening, because my darkness may result in my rejection. If I express my darkness like Oleg did, and Scott hears it and John hears it, we might think, wow, Oleg's a real jerk. And so there's a threat to us, because we want to stay in the community. We want to stay in our tribe. So developing the courage to do what Oleg is incredibly important. And it's a precursor to that self-development that I think, Brian, you were hinting at of, I don't want to just accept my brokenness and leave it there. I want to move beyond it.
Calculated risk. But this is why what you just said, John, is why looking in the mirror in front of you and saying that to yourself is the hardest thing to do.
Oh yeah.
Because people do not. I mean, it's a natural tendency to deny the bad things about yourself. Right.
Can I tell a quick story about this? This was
please.
transformative for me when I was younger. So I had, my dad and I are great friends right now. He's one of my best friends, but growing up, we were very different. So I had kind of classic dad issues. And I was working with a mentor who was like, I looked up at him and he's like, he would be my ideal dad. I mean, I had so much desire for his acceptance. And I met with him the first 2 or 3 times. And he said, John, can I tell you what I thought about you after our last meeting? I'm like, oh yeah, please, Greg, tell me. He said, I think you're a selfish little baby that's mad that the world's not giving him what he wants. And I was devastated. But I put on my poker face. I'm like, oh yeah, Greg, thanks. Oh, I really appreciate the feedback. I went home and just bawled for 3 days. I was just crushed. But to your point, Chris, of being able to look into the mirror, I think we need people in our lives who love us enough to be that mirror. Because what he said about me was spot on. And him confronting me that way, but then doing it with just like barely batting an eye. He wasn't mean. He was casual about it, because he still loved me so much that the fact that I was a spoiled little baby, it didn't matter to him. He's like, oh yeah, that's just true about you. And that's fine. It doesn't bother me. I still care about you. And that was transformative, just for someone to see my darkness, reflect it to me and say, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm 100% for you.
You know what, John? I have a question for the group, and I would love to hear everybody's point on this, because what you just said literally just brought up a question for me. If you truly love someone, right? Truly, and not just the love where if they ask, you agree with everything they say because you don't want to, upset them, right? When it comes to you truly loving somebody and giving them honest feedback about, like, you being that mirror, because being that mirror, you have a lot of responsibility. And talk about courage and risk. If you're courageous enough to be that mirror for someone, and the person is not ready to receive that honest feedback, even though you're not saying it in a malicious way, you're saying it in a loving way. And can you, if you know somebody else and you're trying to be that mirror for them, is it true love if you don't say it because you know it will alter the relationship? Regard whether it's father, mother, spouse, children, friends, you love them, but you also know them, and they're not ready to have the conversation or ready to be told that, and then you tell them that, and then the relationship alters. So we're talking about being the mirror and being courageous in one way, but to you, John, at least you went back. I'm assuming you went back to the to the counselor. Yeah. But what if you like, I cannot believe this person said this to me. Yeah. Right. And then never went back. So how do you balance that part?
Well, I'm just going to jump in real quick, then I'll let you guys talk. I think this gets back to that. Oleg, you were talking about the desire to be accepted by others versus accepting yourself. Being accepted by others it's nothing we can control. I don't think it's not a terribly useful category, but accepting ourselves allows us to grow not only in character and maturity and overcome weaknesses, but we grow in wisdom. Because as I accept my darkness, I realize there's darkness in Chris. I realize there's weakness in Chris. So then I also develop compassion and discernment. So I only hold up the mirror when my wisdom kind of helps me to discern this is the loving thing to do. I've got, I have to count. I've got 12 kids. I've got a lot of kids. Some who are from, different marriages, different systems, but I've got a lot of kids, and each of my children have struggles. I don't hold up the mirror and show them everything because that wouldn't be loving. That would be overwhelming. But discernment and wisdom allows me to know this is the thing to reflect to them now, and to do so with gentleness and even some tentativeness, because I'm going to be humble enough to know that I might be wrong. And so I also want to be open to them correcting my faulty reflection.
I'm going to add another caveat to that. I want to hear your also opinion on this too. With the old adage of true love is accepting the good and the bad, but how much of the bad do you have to accept? So I'm just going to let that linger and then let you all think about those.
One thing I did want to say is and I'm going to be a little negative here, but Oleg said before that sometimes being negative is good. So I feel
Just gonna blame that on
Oleg. Right, let's just take the whole tone down the toilet.
Yeah. No. I'll find the value within it. Keep going.
I think this simple fact that as a culture we need to, I'm trying to find the right words here. The simple fact that we feel this perpetual need to accept ourselves in a way is selfish. Historically, we always kind of thought that we were bad. We never really thought that we were good. We always thought that we were sinful. And when we came from a state of mind of saying, in reality, I am quite tainted, then I believe, were so much more open to criticism and steps to get better, because in our core, we were like, I'm not exactly that perfect. Yeah. I think culturally now we're like, I'm perfect. And it's so hard to have these conversations with people to maybe bring up a few shortcomings, because it's like you got to crack the wall of them thinking they're perfect. Gently bring up one or two things that they might have to work on. Convince them that maybe they're going to have to work on these things. Yeah. Wait until they come to grips with the fact, and then they begin the journey. Whereas back in the day, like it says, I brought up the quote, Proverbs 9:10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, or like just the simple fact that like you not thinking you're really that great is the beginning of the journey of becoming a wise person.
Yeah. I do want to say, Yolanda, welcome back to the show. It is always so good to see you here, and always appreciate you bringing your comments to the table, as are appreciated the continued remarks of Gloria and Margot, which we're highlighting on the screen.
There are two things I wanted to point out that Chris, actually all three of you said. First thing is this. In my opinion, I think it's a limiting belief in thinking that, well, I'm not this. I'm not a racist. I'm not this. I'm not that. I'm not a narcissist. And the only reason why I think about this is in one of my most recent very short-term relationships I was in, I had recognized there was a moment where she had made the comment of, she had asked me the question. She said, "Do you believe you're a narcissist?" And it was the first time I've ever encountered that question. So it was completely out of the blue. And I was like, well, let's explore this. What makes you think I am? And so she listed all the different things. One of them was...
Wait, who was this? Was this on the date you're on?
I'm just going to put up one Margot's remark from earlier.
It's a true story. No names will be given.
Okay.
And so one of the points she brought up was one's inability to accept feedback. And it really got me thinking about this, and it got me thinking about everything that we're talking about today. And it's this concept of, well, I'm not a narcissist, I'm not this, I'm not that. When in reality, what I personally believe in is, in my opinion, we're all elements of it. We all have elements of the shortcomings that I experience when it comes to people of color. There are times where I might show, let's say, narcissistic behavior, and John, please help me out here because I don't know it in full detail, but there are times where I don't play well with people in the same sandbox. I don't accept feedback the same way. And so that is the first thing that I started to challenge, is I believe we're all of that to a degree. Going back to Chris's point at the beginning of this conversation, it's all relative. It's all a matter of perspective. So that's the one point that I wanted to make. And the second one, to kind of tie it into this later part of this conversation, is in regard to love. So I have a slightly different approach that I follow when it comes to being a mirror to someone else in their life. And that's, I don't choose to wait for the right time. And the only reason why I don't choose to wait for the right time, or I don't choose to quote unquote wait until tomorrow, is because I lived that story for far too long. I lived that story of tomorrow. In fact, I wish Nike were to change that slogan from "just do it" to "just do it tomorrow." I think it's a more realistic approach for many people, is because in waiting for tomorrow, I talked myself out of action. Plain and simple. I waited to have that difficult conversation. I waited for the words to come to me. And the words did come to me, but because time had passed, the courage had gone down. So initially, the courage was high to be able to bring up a topic to surface, but then I didn't feel equipped due to not having the right words, not being in the right environment, whatever it was. And then over time, it's almost like roles reversed. And so, for me, what I started to do, and once again, this is just one way of living out of many ways of living life, is I just started to do it in the moment.
Well, I think that, part of the challenge that I have with that is I do feel, now going to something Chris said earlier, but in a different context, the degree of the thing that you're talking about matters. It's not just black or white. So for instance, one time my husband David and I were on vacation, and we were in a department store, and he was like, "Do you like this shirt?" And it looked just like this other shirt that he had that I couldn't stand. And I felt the need, in the interest of improving him, to let him know I didn't like the shirt. Right. And he was like, "Okay, fine." And we decided it was time to end our shopping trip that day. And I didn't need to say that. You know what? He's adorable no matter what. He's cute as a
But
little.
isn't that honestly
Oh my God,
better,
a shirt just got thrown at me.
Oleg,
If-
when Oleg was saying all this, I was like, I'm assuming, Oleg, you're not married.
As a non-married individual, isn't that honestly better?
Right. But then there are times where and I do think that if you have a heavily invested relationship, like one that like my husband and I, we've been together almost 24 years at this point. You're so invested, if the relationship is healthy, which I believe ours is, that you really do want the best for that person. And so you're going to, if it's something egregious, whether a shirt or not, that's just my opinion. Actually, I didn't need to open my mouth at that point. And the truth was, he did look cute no matter what he wore. But, you know.
But isn't it the truth? No, I'm joking.
Well, but then there's other times, yeah, where he's been like, Scott, it's time for that shirt to go into the trash now. And sometimes it's mysteriously disappeared. Okay, that's cool. I can be ready to hear that. But what if he were to say, Scott, you know, you have a permanent foul odor.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, I love you, but I need to, or, and even that, like, is something I presumably could deal with. It would be embarrassing, and I might want to crawl in a hole for a while. But what if he said, you know, Scott, there is a fundamental character flaw in you that is so egregious, going back to John's point, that I will have to reject you. What if for instance, impulsiveness could turn out this way? What if I'm a risk taker, as we talked about earlier, but what if that risk-taking tendency was to manifest itself in rashness in a situation on the street, and I punched someone out or whipped out a gun, right, and shot him and went to jail? You know, now the capacity within me to kill someone would be something that I would have to, in that situation, acknowledge that was there. And going to Melody's point earlier, I could not love that. That would have to be an opportunity for me to very belatedly improve. But is there a right time for David to say something? Maybe not as dramatic as that, but maybe something more like, Scott, there's a fundamental selfishness with you, and I feel like I never get back, and I reject that. Would there be a time to say that? Or maybe it would be, he would need to wait till I had sort of I buttered myself up to the point where I could hear it. Because if you say it, sort of what I'm asking myself and asking Oleg or anyone who might be perceiving this way is then the comment that you're making that the person may or may not be able to hear, one that you're making for their benefit, truly? Or is it for your benefit, for the ego-based need to let that go or to express what's on your mind? Because then timing really, the answer as to whether timing matters or not is conceivably very, very different.
Yeah.
I think.
So
Go ahead,
quick question, because this is going to determine the trajectory of my marriage here, and I have to ask this. and that is, do you believe then that there are certain things you're not able to communicate with full honesty and transparency?
Yeah, I think so, for
absolutely.
sure. I think that from an honesty standpoint with a spouse or you're in a relationship, in my personal opinion, I think it comes down to comfort. I think that if you're with somebody and you're truly comfortable with that person, and you've had real conversations before, I think, and then you've learned them enough how to bring up. I think John said it perfectly. He has a lot of kids that he just can't hold up the mirror to them in the beginning. You have to do it. You have to play chess with emotion and chess with truth sometimes, because you could be real all the time, and then the relationship ends, or it's different, or then they start pointing out things about you that you're not ready to hear yet, right? So I think when you're giving honesty to somebody else, whether it's a spouse, a friend, or your offspring, or whatever, if they react a certain way, are you ready for their reaction? That could be true for you.
And I have to say something about that one, especially. So when I first came out, I was in college, and it was during my first semester of college, and I went to school out of state, and then I came home, and my mother said, Scott, you should always be honest with me. You should never feel like you could lie or would need to lie. And then she said, you know, are you gay? And I said, yes. Okay. She didn't speak to me again for 6 months.
Whoa.
And she was
You know what I'm
very angry. And later she said, you know, you should have lied when I asked you that question. And my feeling about that was, if you don't want to hear the answer to a question, Don't ask
Don't
it.
ask that question.
But her values were very, very different. She wanted in the relationship comfort, not honesty.
See, Scott, you made a very, very, very powerful point earlier. You said, are you bringing up the issue for their benefit or for yours? I think before you give anybody feedback, that's the first thing you may want to assess, because everybody can be annoyed at a certain point. You may can say something, but it's for your benefit. You don't want to be annoyed no more, and in that particular moment. But if you're ready to have a conversation and it's truly for their benefit, I think one, you could be very strategic on how you bring it up, because at that point, you know your spouse, or you know your friend, or you know whoever the case may be, right? You know that person, so you would know if it's truly for their benefit. Okay, for example, if Scott had something on his face right here, me telling him something on his face, hey Scott, you got something right. Think about how many people won't say anything if you walk past them.
Yeah.
Even your friends, they won't say anything. Like if you have something stuck right here, they don't say anything for some reason. I don't know why. But if you have something right here, me telling Scott has nothing to do with me. It's for his. I don't want him going out with a mark on his face that he may not have known. So I can. So it's for his benefits. That's why I think that before you say anything about anything that you're trying to correct, assess yourself first, because that reaction is wrong, and you're doing it out of if you're telling that person something about themselves in being selfish, and they react a certain way and point out something. Well, Chris, you have a huge head, and I hate that. Whoa. Now we get defensive. Now we start pointing, and now we start saying the things that we really want to say, right? So I think that's what you have to.
Yeah,
that's a.
I have to add two things to that, Chris. First of all, my response was based on what my need was, which was to let it out. It wasn't necessarily assessing the entirety of the relationship or the entirety of the stakeholders' needs, including, like I mentioned, what my mother's need was, which was to be comforted. In her case, I think she would have.
Did you know that though?
I didn't know it, but also I didn't have the maturity or the wisdom, as John would have said earlier, to assess that so I could even make a decision. I may have still said the same thing that I did, but I would have done it in from a more informed perspective.
Well, and I think, I'm sorry, Scott, did I step on your...
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Because there is one other thing about, that I want to say, which is that being honest about that, and also thinking about what the impact of that honesty may have, even if it is for that other person's benefit on that person. So when I was a teenager, I was in counseling, and I had a problem because I was asking girls out. This was before I came out of the closet, obviously. And all of them were saying no. And the counselor, and I was like saying, I want to go on a date. What's happening? I have a crush on this one. I have a crush on all this. And he said, Scott, the problem is that, being honest with you, and I'm saying this because I love you, is that you're ugly. You need to date the ugly girls. How do you think ugly people get all the dates? Okay, ugly people date each other, and then so start asking the ugly girls out. You're going for these good-looking girls. Ask the ugly girls out, and you'll have all the dates you can get. Right now, in his mind, he was saying that to help me. Scott, you're not the best-looking child in the world. I can admit that I wasn't, and that's how I would get a date, by stop going after people that I was attracted to. Yes, if I went after all the girls that no one wanted to date,
perfect.
I would. But you think about it, that was for me. But think about the impact that had on me. I developed a complex about my looks, and so then that's another element of what we're saying to people. And when, if I were to tell my husband this about the shirt, that may have been ostensibly or even sincerely because I cared about him and how he presented into the world. Like I said, really, he's cute no matter what. But that being said, what if he had baggage inside about how he looked? And what if that really triggered something that was far deeper and developed a complex in him that was far more important and significant for me to consider as a loving person than a damn shirt that he bought at some department store in Tampa or Miami.
Well, you can always throw out a shirt. You can't throw out your face. That's the difference.
Well, let's address that, actually. Let's just be a mirror to Scott. Scott, you grew out of the ugliness. You're all right, man. You're good. Okay.
I just
Whatever
said
the-
that for a compliment,
Yeah,
right?
I know you were fishing, so I wanted to help you out. But I just wanted to say something off of what Chris was saying. The benefit, this is where I think really discernment becomes important, because in a relationship, there's me, there's them, and then there's us. And so there's multiple benefits we're looking for. There's me reflecting something to them for their benefit, but also there's times I need to say something to them for my benefit. And that's just as important, because I'm important in the relationship too. And then there's the benefit to the relationship. So I think there's three different ways we consider the benefit
Great
of
point.
kind of giving feedback.
That's a great point, John.
I'm gonna have to have these conversations again. Like when I'm ready to, ask the
Yes,
question.
Oleg.
Like
Yeah, Oleg.
these
Yeah,
are like
yeah.
serious
Yes, Oleg. Yes.
Hopefully you're taking notes.
ounces of
Yeah.
wisdom. Oh yeah, ounces of wisdom
Ounces
everywhere.
on-
Like
Yeah.
this is no, but
There's-
seriously, it's a really good point, and I think as I'm even reflecting upon all this, there have been so many times throughout my own relationships where I forgot about the bigger picture. I was so focused either on you or me and forgot about us, or the same exact thing where I was so focused on us, but I abandoned myself out of it. I didn't give myself the time where I needed the time. I wasn't honest, or I didn't have the courage to say that, hey, I need 2 hours today to just do nothing. In no way can I contribute in whatever fashion you want me to. This is just what I need. And I just think that's such a valid, there's a lot of truth in that.
That's
So
healthy.
I'm going to take that to heart. And John, I hope to thank you one day for my successful marriage.
Yeah,
No.
you got to go find that other flat earther gal out there. Well matched.
Now, there is one area that a lot of people have a total lack of courage around, and that is pointing others to where people can find them so they can learn more about them and engage and interact with them. So before we get into our sponsor, let's take a few seconds, especially because we have a pretty large group today, to maybe work on any fears that we might have about putting ourselves and who and what we are in the world that is amazing out for everyone to see. And I'm just going to go across my screen. Homie Oleg in the gold shirt.
Wait. No, I was going to say, you got to look yourself in the mirror and face your own fears first.
Okay, I'll start with me. Why not? So I'm Scott Mason. You can find out more about me on at the website for my podcast, purposehighway.com. This is exploring how spirituality, ethics, and the connection that people find to each other in their search for purpose have changed as the paradigms that we are engaging in throughout the world with shifting technology and cultural shifts are themselves changing. Powerful guests, including Oleg, who was the very first guest on that show, and some other people that we all know and love. And also, please follow me on LinkedIn, where you will get your daily dose of Greek mythology and business advice and wisdom, as well as thoughts on transformation. I'm on Instagram as well. All right, Oleg, you got me to overcome my fears. Now, talk.
Before I say anything in regard to where people can find me, Scott, I just want to acknowledge something about who you are. So 2 years ago, when you and I first connected, you wanted to create your podcast and you wanted to start this trajectory that you're on. It's been I can't even put it into words in being able to see your journey and the things you've been able to accomplish. But I think more importantly, the person that you've become. Not necessarily any milestones that you've reached, but the person that you've become along the journey. It's been fascinating to observe that. So I'm just really happy that you found whatever you were looking for to face your own fears and continue to have the courage to step into the space of entrepreneurship, which is, in my opinion, a huge space of unknown, full of uncertainty, but you do it. You're constantly challenging your own thing, and how you bring Greek mythology to life. You truly are one of a kind. So I wanted to acknowledge that before I say anything else. So for me, it's simple. LinkedIn is a personal space where people can connect with me. And outside of that is an organization that I've started. Scott is also a part of on the board, called Overcoming Odds. And there, our mission is to create a space for people to develop their own narrative, one they believe in, one that they like, So everything that we discussed today when it comes to fears, limitations, finding purpose, finding meaning, those are all topics that we try and have conversations about. But one thing that I'll mention is I don't think any of this would be possible, if it wasn't for other people, if it wasn't for other successful shows like Brian's and Chris's. And that's where I figured that also the two of you have played a big influence in my life and in the work that you continue to do.
Absolutely. Brian?
So thank you, Scott. So Chris and I don't know where Chris went. I miss him. But Chris and I host the show Success Fundamentals. It is a podcast where we are basically trying to figure out what does it actually mean to be a successful person. Is it financial? Is it spiritual? Is it something else? Is it physical? Is it all of them? So we interview awesome people on the show like Oleg. We've had Scott on the show twice. And we explore a lot of these questions surrounding what does it mean to be a successful person. And we're having a great time. We're learning a lot. And we would love if you guys tuned in and listened to a few episodes. Love to have you.
Chris, do you have anything you want to add to that?
One, I want to apologize because for some reason I just hopped out the chat, but
it's accepted. You're fully accepted here.
I fully accept that.
Well, from a follow standpoint, Chris Sykes on LinkedIn. If you want daily inspirational content, go there. Pretty sure Brian just pointed out our show Success Fundamentals. Not only do we talk to successful people, we kind of debunk everything about success, and we talk about theories that are conventional wisdom and kind of turn them upside down, right? Because remember earlier we said that nothing is black or white. We take topics just to give you a teaser from a topic standpoint where we're going to be breaking down, do people's opinions actually matter? We're going to break all that down, right? So anyways, it's a platform where we just kind of give you a very real concept of what success is, and kind of have topics that we may not know the answers to, but we just kind of break them down on the show. We also have our Instagram as well, Success Fundamentals Podcast on Instagram and Facebook.
And John Dillow.
Yep. Well, you can find me on Instagram, John Dillow Counseling. And then you can also find me at my website, johndillowcounseling.com. And I've got an upcoming online experience that I'm putting together called Change Your Story, Change Your Life. It's going to be about how do you shift your story in a very specific and deliberate way to get a change in your life that you really want. And so that'll be a 4-week kind of interactive experience. There'll be some video teaching as well as some live interaction with me and also a group interaction. And that'll be for 4 weeks starting in March. You can also find me on the website. I do counseling throughout the country and I actually do a lot of counseling overseas. So if you're looking to kind of explore what counseling could be like for you, feel free to contact me on that website as well.
John, quick question for you, since this is the first encounter that you and I are having, hopefully one of many. Not hopefully, I'll make sure of that. I'll reach out.
It'd be great. Yep.
Why do you do what you do?
Why? Well, one, I am a very broken individual myself. I've got, I would say right now, you can hear me talk about it on Instagram. I've been struggling with a very high functioning depression for several years. Rarely do I go through a week where I'm not broken down and in tears at some point, but I've learned enough skills to put myself back together and get up and function. Some of what motivates me to do that is I'm very connected to a specific purpose of pushing back against the darkness in the world. I can be okay with the darkness in us because I can separate that from the identity of who we are. But I am not okay with the darkness in the world, the oppression, the damage, the abuse. And so counseling was probably the most fitting way for me, the way I'm shaped, to be able to help draw people out of that darkness, help be some sort of a guide out of that darkness, or even just a companion to sit with them in the pain from that darkness. So,
powerfully put.
Thank you for sharing that.
Margot, Gloria, Yolanda, in absentia, Melody, Alexandria, And anyone else who showed up for the Shauna, who showed up for the show tonight, who I am missing, thank you all for being here. It has been invaluable. By the way, don't hesitate to connect with each other too. Some great friendships have been made by people connecting with each other through the comments. And I would love to connect with all of you. And I'm sure anyone else on the show would love to connect with you too. Your participation and your insights were simply invaluable. Now, on the subject of courage, one of the prior special guests on this show was Patrick Bardsley. He is the CEO of a company called Spectrum Designs. Spectrum Designs is a t-shirt and apparel printing company, and they also do embroidery for apparel that employs almost exclusively people on the autistic spectrum. Those who are on the autistic spectrum have a close to 90% unemployment rate. So he's providing real, meaningful career path jobs for folks that might not have it otherwise. And by the way, as the host of this show, they have put together t-shirts for us, and they have done incredible work for some of the top brands around the country and if not, and the world itself. They are well worth knowing about. And to close out, we're going to turn the show over to a fun little animation that'll give you some more information about them.